So I'm going to introduce myself first, and then you're going to introduce yourself, and then we're just going to get into the questions and discussion. So my name is Veronica Chapman. I am a self-published children's book author, and I founded this platform under my company Boxxout, which means to think outside the box to design creative solutions for social change. And basically, when I was promoting my books, when I first published in 2015, other people would say, well, how do I find other books with Black characters? And at that time, there weren't a lot of platforms to do that. So I founded Black Baby Books to help promote other authors that I would meet out in these streets. Because, I meet people and I'm like, they're my family for life. Until they're not. No, play. No. Anyway, I say all that to say, so that is I'm Veronica. And Nicole, can you please introduce yourself, Doctor?
Sure. My name is Dr. Nicole Christian-Brathwaite. I am a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I specialize in working with children with a history of trauma, and also I specialize in working with perinatal and postpartum moms, particularly moms of color, because we so often and children of color, because we so often don't have the opportunities to meet with psychiatrists who have some level of cultural humility and understanding to actually support our communities. And I love speaking and working with our community because there's so much fear of the medical system, which is certainly valid because we have been through a lot. And so I think it's important that we are represented, in medicine, and that we can have people that look like us that we can trust and go to.
That's real because, man, sometimes, okay, we're just gonna, what, let's just take a moment to breathe. Because, I just feel like there's so much going on. And as we're talking about children, I'm feeling like, as someone who is like an empath, I like feel the pain of the world. I love people in general. And it's devastating to me when people aren't trying to be great. So they want to be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, all these phobics and just isms. But but I'm an adult, right? And I'm emotionally developed and I can process and I can Google things that help me. But then we have children. And children don't always know how to process everything. And I just want to tell you two stories, and then I'll get your response. Last week, I was participating in a youth virtual, speaking to youth virtually. And one of the teenagers in this group, he wrote a poem that was so sad and devastating about his fear of walking down the street, being stopped by police, being killed. Like, he just turned 16. Will he live longer? Will he live long enough to see another day? And it was a sad and alarming piece that he had posted on social media that alarmed his friends and family. But at the same time, a lot of the adults in his life were like, okay, we see your feelings and we validate your feelings and we don't want you to feel hopeless, but that's a reality. So that's a teenager. And then I also was told a story of a young boy, he's 7, Black boy. And he told his mother he didn't want to grow up to be a Black man because he was afraid of being killed by police. Wow. So what are we to do? What are we to do? Yes, internalized racism is a real thing too. So what are we to do in general? How do we even help both teenagers and young kids? I mean, it's probably different. I don't know, cope with things like this.
And it's funny because I'm used to kind of working with supporting other people's children and other people's families. And then it hit home. So last week, I don't watch the news. I'm very intentional. We'll talk about this later, but I'm very intentional about protecting what I allow into my mind, into my spirit, into my heart. And so I don't watch the 24-hour news cycle because I want to be selective in what I allow in. So unfortunately, my husband was watching the news and he walked away. And my now 6-year-old, he just turned 6 on Saturday, walked into the room and there was another video of police killing another Black man. And before I could get into the room, the entire video had played.
Oh,
and
no.
He was frozen, just standing there like a deer in headlights. And then he looked at me and he's an empath, he feels things very deeply. And he just started crying, and it was like that deep pain. He was sobbing. And he ran to me, he's like, Mommy, in school they learn about community helpers and like firefighters and police officers and nurses and doctors.
Mm-hmm.
These are community helpers. These are people whose job it is to be supportive of other people. And so he really just, and kids are so black and white. And so he just didn't understand. He said, Mommy, police are community helpers. Why would they hurt that man? And so I had to have a discussion with him in a way that he can understand. And this is a lot of the discussion when talking to younger kids, is using a language that they get, that some people don't respect and don't love other people simply because of their color of their skin. And there is no reason for that. And unfortunately, there's some people in positions of power who can then use that dislike or that hatred for other people, and they hurt them. And he just was inconsolable. And for the rest of the night cried. He would not let me go. Mommy, are they going to take you? Mommy, are they going to hurt you? Mommy, please don't leave. My husband wasn't home. He was out. We had to call him to prove to my son that he was safe. He was afraid to go to sleep. I had to lay with him. He woke up the next morning and I wasn't in the room, and he's like frantically screaming for me. And so here I am in a situation supporting other families, and now my son has been traumatized simply because he walked into the room when the news was on. And as we realize, the news does not value Black lives simply because they recklessly show Black death. And obviously, if they had any value for Black lives, they would not repeatedly show the murder of innocent Black lives over and over and over again. And so there's the other concern around, like, just in general, the media not valuing us. And so realizing that I had to offer support. So that day my son regressed. The next day he was more irritable. He was crying more, but I also understood that was a trauma reaction. And exposure to racism is trauma. In the same way that experience a sexual assault is trauma, in the same way experiencing a major loss or car accident, those are all traumatic experiences. Racism is traumatic. And so now I have to support my son because he just encountered a traumatic experience. And so supporting kids around this, giving them more love, giving them more reassurance, allowing them to have that regression, because that's how kids deal with stress. They regress.
And can you explain what regress means? Sure.
So like they'll go back. So like when COVID first started, my 3-year-old, who's been fully potty trained, suddenly became not potty trained when he wasn't in school and didn't have like the same routine. Like teenagers, when they're under stress, they regress by being more irritable or shutting down or whining more or kind of just behaving as if they're younger than they are. And so oftentimes when kids are under significant stress, they regress. I mean, adults regress too. When we are overwhelmed, we tend to behave in more childlike ways. So that's very common. And I think what people don't understand is that when Black children are subject to racism, it affects their mind, their body, and their soul. And we can talk about this more, but that has potential long-term consequences.
So so you kind of touched on this question, but I want you to just be really specific about what does it do? Because you like I log into Black Baby Books, and it's not, obviously, I'm the kind of person who tries to do all I can, right? Like, I'm donating to bail funds, I'm developing things to empower Black children, blah, blah, blah. And you log in, and every single day you have the chance of witnessing a death on social media. I don't need to see it to believe it, and I'm not the kind of, I can't watch people die. I can't do it. But you have specifically talked about what it does to bodies, what it does to Black people, Black children, when they do witness that. And since we've witnessed like 5 in the last 3 weeks or something, at least 5, can you talk to us more about how does that impact, let's put adults in here too, and then also our children? So
racism is a form of toxic stress. And essentially, toxic stress is stress that's unpredictable, it's prolonged, and it's frequent. And so what happens with toxic stress, and it's overwhelming to the system. So toxic stress essentially are situations where you can't control it, you don't know when it's coming, and when it happens, it feels like it's almost unbearable. And so racism is toxic stress, because you don't know when you're driving if you'll be pulled over. You don't know when you go for a run, or when your son or your brother or your husband goes for a run, if they're going to return home. You don't know if when your 16-year-old walks to the store, if he'll be accosted by some, vigilante and murdered. Like, so what toxic stress ends up doing is it causes us to constantly be on edge, because you don't know when that bad thing is going to happen. So your body is always in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so toxic stress forces Black people, Black Americans, to be in survival mode pretty consistently. Our bodies and our brains weren't meant to be in survival mode for extended periods of time. It's good that your heart rate increases and your blood pressure increases when there's a car about to hit you or a lion coming, because you stop thinking clearly and you just go into survival. Your muscles tense. All of your focus is on just the basic needs of survival. You're not able to think critically, and your blood pressure increases, your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your hormones, your stress hormones increase. But that's fine if that happens for 3 minutes. But imagine that happening every day you have to walk into work. Imagine that happening every day your child has to walk into a school where they're one of the only ones there, and they know that they're going to be treated differently by their peers or by their teachers. That is exhausting. And toxic stress produces chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation produces chronic disease. So toxic stress causes heart disease, diabetes, it increases risk of suicide, it increases risk of depression, obesity. And it's interesting that African Americans and Black people are at greater risk for having more toxic stress. It's also interesting that we're at greater risk for having obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, which are also the reasons that we're dying more from COVID. So all of that is connected to racism. And so racism affects our bodies by literally wearing them down and leading us to have chronic inflammation and chronic disease, which causes a host of other problems. And, racism is because there may not be bus service that's near our home. There's no supermarket that carries fresh fruits and vegetables, or if it does, it seems like we got the leftovers and not the actual fresh ones, or the prices of food and gas are so much higher in our community, so we have to work twice as hard to meet our basic needs. And so racism is on so many levels. So we are being bombarded constantly with toxic stressors that affect our overall well-being. And so essentially racism causes us to have chronic health, mental and physical health problems.
Okay. And so I'm the kind of person, what can I control? Like, if people want to subscribe to whiteness and white supremacy, unless they do the work, it's going to be like, they have to do that work. I cannot tell someone to be less racist. They have to want to be great. And if you want to subscribe to white supremacy, there's no greatness in that. There's no greatness in whiteness. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like people who are doing these things, they're creating structures, these racist structures. They're fine, except for the ones who can change. But that's still not our job. What our job is to do what we can to control what is in our control. And can you talk to us about what can we do for our kids? Like, we can't, if people aren't trying to be great, and people always like, but if people already think great, they already think they're superior, some of them won't try to be great people, right? So there's a few who are waking up now, and may they continue. But what can we do for our children? Because you have to be able to do something for them.
Right. No, I mean, we do. And so they're actually, fortunately, there are more people who are researching this, and there are more scientists, and there's more money going behind trying to figure out how do we deal with toxic stress and how do we deal with the trauma of racism. And so for our children, there actually are a few things that have been shown to work. So self-love and appreciating your race, appreciating your ethnicity, and really internalizing that, like, Black is beautiful, the Black girls rock, like internalizing that, like my ancestors were incredible people, and not even just ancestors in books, but like my grandmother was an incredible person. My grandmother worked 12-hour days scrubbing a white woman's floor, and then came home and cooked a meal for her family, and then, you know, and helped raise her neighbor's kids. And so when we think of the greatness of our ancestors, we have to also realize how much they overcame. And so teaching our children how incredible they are and who they've come from and why they're beautiful and why they're excellent. And despite everything that we've been through and despite the chronic oppression that continues, we're still incredible and we're still great. And when they look at studies between children who are able to handle racism and handle some of the discrimination and children who struggle more with handling it, one of the bigger differences is a sense of self-love. And so representation, like Black baby books, having images around you that are positive, and watching TV shows that reinforce positive messages. And, you know, and so it's not only, you know, internally loving yourself, but also feeling like the people around you value your Blackness and value your ethnicity, which is why, you know, when Miss America, Miss Universe, and when all of those women were selected, that meant so much. One, because it was, you know, finally people are recognizing how beautiful Black women are. We always knew it, but it just took the rest of the world some time to catch up. But that's important, because self-love and being reminded of how wonderful our children are, that helps them. But also to recognize that other people see how great they are matters. And so surrounding your children with people who will validate them and value them and show them love and support and kindness, that, and helping to kind of build them. So children need to have that foundation, knowing that our kids are walking into a toxic world. To be able to really focus on building that foundation of self-love can make a huge difference in there. And it's been shown to be a buffer. So loving being Black, appreciating the hair that grows out of your head, appreciating the melanin in your skin, can actually be a buffer to protect you from racism.
Yeah. Okay, you talked before about children regressing.
Yes. So I'm sorry, please.
So somebody posed the question, how do you identify signs that your child is in distress? Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
Yeah, that's the same thing.
Okay.
So again, when I think about children who experience racism, think about it in the same way of a child experiencing any type of trauma. So, you know, car accident or tragically losing a friend or a loved one. And if you really relate racism in the same way, so, you know, again, using my son, when he was 3 years old, a 5-year-old white girl told him that his brown skin was ugly and that he shouldn't wear red shoes because it looked ugly on his brown skin. And he was 3. So unfortunately, my son's first experience with racism was when he was 3. And it wasn't surprising because we knew the parents of the 5-year-old, and we already knew what their values were. So that day he came home and he was devastated. So this is my same son who unfortunately walked in and saw the murder of a young Black man on the news. So he came, he was crying, he took off his favorite red sneakers, he threw them against the wall, and he said, "I'm never wearing these again because they look ugly on my ugly brown skin." And you know, we both cried, because I was, you know, again, I wasn't ready. I'm like, he's 3. He should not have had to experience something like that at 3. And that, you know, we started having those conversations about how beautiful he is, and, you know, my emphasizing to him that the problem is with that person, the problem is not with you. Your greatness intimidates other people, but that's not your issue, that's their weakness. And having, you know, and at 3 years old, having to have the conversation, and that's, you know, we already had a number of books with Black kids, but that's when I just like went hard. You know, every Black baby book I find, I'm buying it. I'm like, you know, what cartoons, what TV shows, what can we read? How can I reinforce on a daily basis how exceptional he is? Right. So, and we also, you know, realized that he, you know, that environment wasn't the right environment for him, because when we approached the teacher said, "Well, we don't see color here."
Oh, come on.
That couldn't have happened because we don't see color here. And I'm just like, well, then I need you to see his color, because that 5-year-old saw his color and insulted him and hurt him. So if you don't see his color, it means that you can't recognize his greatness and you can't defend him. Right. So, you know, and again, after that experience, he had a really hard time. He didn't want to go to school. He had separation anxiety. And so when we think about what happens when our kids experience racism or experience bullying, what's described as bullying, but is often race-based, that we will see changes in behavior. We'll see kids become more irritable, more sensitive. Teenagers, or even older kids, we may see them shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're asking them a question, they look blank. Mm-hmm. They're not really engaged. They don't want to talk about it. They're more isolative in their rooms, or they just seem to snap for no reason at all. And it's frustrating as parents because you don't understand that. Mm-hmm. But one of the best things that we can do is, one, being patient and giving them an opportunity to talk. So especially older kids and teenagers, they don't want to just sit and talk about it. But, maybe when you're taking a walk, maybe when you're playing video games together, when they're slightly distracted and it feels a little less uncomfortable and confrontational to have that discussion. And for teenagers, it can be annoying that you're asking the same questions over again, but they need to know that we're present, that we're there, that we're listening, and that they have our full undivided attention and support.
Right.
This is hard. It's hard for adults to have to deal with. All of us have been in an environment where we've experienced some level of aggression from our white coworkers or bosses, and we come home and we just snap. And if you take a moment, you're like, it's not that my mother or my spouse did something, it's that coworker did something, and I'm internalizing that pain.
Right.
And then it just comes out. And children end up doing the same thing.
It's just so devastating, and I'm just like totally disgusted that our children just can't be. And this whole, and like somebody in the comments mentioned, and what you said, like this whole I don't see color. No, I need you to see my color.
Exactly.
If you can't see my color, acknowledge it, affirm it, love it. You have no business teaching.
Right.
You shouldn't be teaching. And that's the problem. And that's why I say, like, people don't know how to separate whiteness from white people, right? You don't have to be white to subscribe to whiteness. You can be Black. You could be someone who's coming here who doesn't want to receive the same treatment that they see like Black people experience, and they'll do anything to subscribe to, right? So it's really challenging if you're growing up subscribing to this idea that you're great. And so our children are growing up around people who believe they're great, but they're not, right? And they believe they have the right to inflict harm, the right to dehumanize. The people who really subscribe to this. And from what you're saying, it sounds like our children have to have armor on, this armor of Black is beautiful, Black boy joy, Black girls rock, I'm intelligent. Like, you almost have to dress them every day, put their socks on, put their undergarments on, put their coat on, and put the armor guy. And on top of that, all these affirmative things, they have to leave the house wearing that. And then we have to cover them, right? Because they leave the house and, it's just crazy. We've seen sometimes they don't come back, right? Or sometimes, like you're saying, it can be just as violent to be in a classroom where someone can disrespect you and your teacher won't stand up for you, is what you're saying happened.
And, not even just that. So when we look at numbers, so Black preschoolers make up about 18% of the kids enrolled, but they're over 40% of the preschoolers expelled. Mm-hmm. That's preschool. So that's 3. So our children are experiencing racism from their teachers at age 3. And then when you look at elementary and high school, particularly Black boys, mm-hmm. Black boys are deemed more aggressive and less innocent by age 7. And Black children are 3 times as likely to be suspended or expelled for the exact same behaviors that white kids do. And so many, many times our kids are experiencing racism and they don't even know why, but they'll tell you, my teacher does not treat me fairly, mm-hmm. or I am not treated other kids or treated, or my teacher seems to pick on me when so-and-so did the exact same thing I did. And the fact is they're probably right, because statistics show that we are Black and brown children, Black and Latinx children make up 70% of the kids referred to law enforcement through school. So when our children say that they're not being treated fairly, that's true. And, it's so tough because when we, as Black people, we work hard to get our kids through school. We work hard to reach certain economic potentials. But unfortunately, what we know is that the more money Black people make and the wider the environments are that we're in, the greater the risk for depression and the greater the risk for suicide. And that's because we are entering into these really hostile environments. And so for a lot of people, making more money, for other races, making more money is protective, right? You're in safer neighborhoods, you have better medical coverage, you have more positive exposures. But for Black people, it's actually a risk factor because of racism.
See, and so one of the community submitted questions actually talked about that, and she says she's raising a Black son, and how can I see him to see Black beauty more? Because of all the advertising where they're living, he's starting to covet white features and not value his Black features, which is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I mean, again, because when you walk into a school, the books on the shelves, the posters on the walls, they're Eurocentric beauty. I mean, if our child were to Google a beautiful woman, 99% of the pictures that come up are white women. If you Google a beautiful girl, there are no Black girls that come up in those images. And so the definition of beauty in our American culture, and it's practically a white-centered, white supremacist culture, is white beauty. And so, as parents, as families, again, we're practically trying to flood our children with opposite imageries and positive imageries to try to combat what they're dealing with every day. And so, being aware of what our children are seeing on social media, being aware of who they follow. And if you are on social media or your kids are on social media, encourage them to follow social media influencers who are Black, social media influencers who actually have something positive to say about Black people and about Black children, because they're being bombarded in school. All of the books are Eurocentric. Slavery is 2 pages. Black history is relegated to the shortest month of the year, and it's usually Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and that's all they learn about. They're not shown that the strength of the rest of our history, pre-slavery and after slavery. And so we have to, as Black families, we have to supplement so much of our children's education in order to uplift them and to give them that foundation. So, as you were saying, we need to cover them in Black love. We need to cover them positive Black imagery, and we need to kind of be aware of what they're reading, what they're looking at, the videos that they're watching, because more and more there's Black content available through books, through cartoons, through TV, and ensuring that as long as you have control over what your kids are watching, that you're infusing some of that Black positivity and that Black love into the video games, the TV, the books, everything.
It's so funny you said that. I don't know this person. Somebody, I believe he's a white man based on his review. He wrote a review of my book, King Khalid is Proud. And we've already talked about this, that I write books to empower and affirm Black children. That is my reason for writing. So that element isn't anything that I do. But in his review of my book, he said, he gave it 4 stars out of 5, which, hey, that's cool. He said, he's like, yeah, it's like a really good book and teaching about being proud of yourself and proud of the things you do. And I think there's also this element of being proud of being Black. And I was like, and so then I posted his review on my thing. I was like, this review is 100% accurate. 100% accurate. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm glad you saw that. I think it was worth 5 stars, just that alone. But, but that's, I went to a historically Black college, went to Spelman College, and I know that to go to an HBCU is a privilege. I mean, a lot of times because they don't have the money to give. I still have to become rich and give. That's part of my goal, to become rich so I can give money to Spelman and FAMU and all these schools, right? I have those kind of rich goals, no Mercedes, no, money to the HBCUs. But anyway,
you have endowment rich goals.
Endowment rich, those are my goals. My goals are all how much can I give away? But I say all that to say that I know everyone won't get the opportunity to go to an HBCU, and there's nothing more affirming than that experience. There's just nothing more affirming than it. You won't find it anywhere else. And so for my children's books, I write as if they're on an HBCU campus. That is the way that I write. That's the only way that I can do it for those reasons, because I want them to have the full armor. And this is because, again, like I talked about earlier, my friends always say, y'all always talk about me, and Stephanie, who's on here, she's always saying that I don't let them make basic decisions. Like my friends can't be basic. I'm always holding them to a higher standard. But I'm like that with everyone. I'm like that with every single person I meet, period. Like my favorite thing to do is see people become their greatest selves. And that's why I focus so much on Black children, because it's harder for them to become their greatest selves because they're having to deal with all of this other external stuff that really isn't about them. Like racism is about white people having to convince themselves that they're superior, knowing they're not, and having to inflict pain and power to try to reinforce that. That's what that is. And unfortunately, like we said earlier, unless those people determine that they want to change that, we have to do what we can for our children. So I just want them to be great. I want them to be covered in this greatness, right? And so I think it's so awesome that you shared the best thing it sounds like we can do is just reinforce their greatness, and their greatness tied to their Blackness.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. I mean, definitely there's, many other things we can do. Like there's evidence that engaging in regular practices of mindfulness or meditation can also help us to, when we experience racism, help us to deal with the stress better, so that we're not having that survival reaction every time. So and prayer is meditation. And so oftentimes if you have a religious practice, you're already engaging in that intentional, present of being mindful and being present in the moment. But if we're able to teach our children to be mindful, so mindfulness can even be like when I take walks with my kids, I'm like, what do you smell? So using our 5 senses, what do you smell? What do you see? What can you taste? What can you hear? And what can you feel? And, so when you're in that moment of focusing on what am I hearing? What am I smelling? You're not caught up in thinking about what that coworker did, or what that kid said to you, or the last horrible video that you just saw. You're being present. You're appreciating the moment, and you're able to kind of and being mindful, it lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your heart rate. So everything that stress does, mindfulness does the exact opposite. And mindfulness allows us to access the higher thinking parts of our brain. When we're in survival mode, we can't think. So one of the struggles with Black children, they're dealing with being in school, they're dealing with racism, they're dealing with being in survival mode. So it makes it difficult for them to learn and retain information, because if they're in a hostile environment where they don't feel safe. Gotcha. And, this is an entirely different subject, but schools need to become more trauma informed, and they need to change the way that they approach our children so that it's a safe environment, and so that our kids aren't under so much stress. But if we can teach our children, even in the school environment, close your eyes or focus on one spot in the room, take a few deep breaths, and just listen to the sounds. Like what outside the teacher talking, what else? Do you hear someone crumpling paper, or are you smell like, what do you smell like? What does your pencil smell like? Or, even so I bought my kids this lavender hand sanitizer. I know hand sanitizer is hard to come by right now. I bought my kids this lavender hand sanitizer. So when they're struggling, I'll spray the hand sanitizer on, and I'm like, just take a deep breath and smell the lavender or peppermint, and what does that make you think about? Or what are some things that you can say to yourself? So my 3-year-old says, I'm calm, when he smells the hand sanitizer. He's having a hard time. And so I reinforce that enough where when they are struggling, I'm like, let's take a break and let's use our sense of smell. Or like my Aiden, when he's struggling, my oldest, he loves sour things, so he actually likes to bite lemons. Because when he's struggling, he knows that, for whatever reason, his sense of taste is a very strong sense for him. So that helps him to focus and be present. And so, doing this on a regular basis, teaching our kids to be present, teaching our kids to take deep breaths. And I can post a list of some activities and things that our kids can do to help them be mindful. But all of these things prepare them for when they're in a situation that's stressful, but they can still maintain their presence and not become overwhelmed.
Okay. Yeah, because you mentioned earlier about teachers. One of our community members, she's a white teacher, and she's the one, she's trying to be great. So she's like, what? I know you speak to education systems, but I mean, is there any, there's no quick fix, right? Like how she wants to know how she can make sure that she's not perpetuating any anti-Black trauma on her Black students. But like, there's no quick answer, right? What does that look like? I mean, you know.
I mean, so for it to really change, it has to be on the individual level, but you also need the superintendent and the principal and, you know, the vice principal and everyone else to be invested in it, because if it's only you, then when they leave your classroom, it's not enough. And so if you want it to start on an individual level, it's one, acknowledging your privilege, acknowledging that you likely have microaggressed or have some level of implicit bias, and doing some self-reflection. So if teachers really want to do the work, I need you to look at your rates of suspension, and I need you to look at your disciplinary actions and who suffered the most, and who did you send to the principal's office most last year, and who received out of school suspensions or expulsions from you most last year. And more likely than not, more of those people that you disciplined harshly were Black children. And so then now you need to take a step back and ask yourself why, and do some of the work that's necessary. So yes, you know, reading Ibram Kendi and reading White Fragility, all of that is important, but you also need to start asking some of the difficult questions. Why did you make those decisions? Or, you know, again, like a lot of well-meaning liberal white people will tell their kids racism is terrible, but then when a Black person is walking down the street, they grab their child or they grab their bags. And so that, you know, you can say everything you want to say, but your actions speak much louder to your child. And so your bias is very clear. And so you may be well-meaning, but it's not enough. You have to do more. And, you know, as an individual, you need to talk to your principal. If you see that in general, students of color are being disciplined or students of color don't feel safe, then you need to be an advocate. Because, you know, frankly, it's exhausting. Black people can't fight every battle. And frankly, racism is not our battle to fight.
It's not.
So it really needs to be the battle of white individuals. And so you need to step up for your students and for your coworkers, because they're too busy surviving to have to try to fight a battle. And so if you really want to be helpful, then you really want to speak to the leadership and ask them to invest money and time into teaching other teachers about bias and racism, and changing your practices and looking at the way that your school approaches children and why isn't your school safe. And, you know, looking at your environment, are there pictures of Black people on the walls? Are there Black books in your classroom? Is Black history, what is Black history to your school, and why is it only in February? And what books are you reading, and what do those books say about Black individuals?
Right. There's so much. Here's the thing. It's like, it's a hard thing to balance, because it's like most Black people, I would say a majority, hopefully, we wouldn't change it for the world. Like, being Black is a blessing. It's a beautiful thing. I just, you know, maybe because I was raised on like, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, and don't believe the hype, and you know, like, and it's like, despite it all, no, I mean, I wouldn't want to change it, but I know there's some children who they're like, this is so unbearable, you know, like, and hearing that is so heartbreaking, you know, it's just like, it's so heartbreaking to hear. And I'm just, I don't know, like, I don't even have children yet. I'm like, anytime I hear a story, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like, all these kids are bad kids, you know, like, it's just so hard to see this, because especially as someone who, you know, me, I'm always like, I see the greatness in everyone, and I speak to greatness. And it's when I meet somebody, you know, I'm an energy person, I feel the energy, and they're so great and they don't believe it. It's like, that's how my feelings get hurt. Like that, I'm so strange. Like that's what I'm upset, right? So, you know, for these kids, okay, I just want to make sure we're documenting all this. We need to arm them with Black pride. We need to reinforce them at home. We need to create a group of friends or a community around them that affirms them and reinforces who they are. We need books that are not just have Black characters, but are like, you know, are affirming and making sure that there are no, I mean, hidden biases. Like sometimes there was like a book that, I don't know if you want to speak on it. there's a book. You want to speak on it or not?
There's
exactly what it is. Okay, so there's a book.
I won't say the names. Okay. There are books that look like they're made for Black children, but they're not empowering Black children. So there are books where, there's a book that talks about a little boy and he was being teased by white kids. And a lot of the book just goes through the white children's insults of him. And then, at the end of the book, he's making cupcakes for these white kids to be friends. But there's nothing about that book empowering him, but it's more of him appeasing these people that were hurting him. And for me, that's not necessarily that's not the story that I want to tell my children about how to deal with racism. It's important to control what we can control. And a part of trauma is it's unpredictable and it's out of your control. So absolutely to combat trauma and deal with trauma, we need to change things and we need to feel like we're agents of change and we have autonomy. But trying to, appease the aggressor is not the way that I would do it. And so not every book is affirming. And we just need to be careful that we're using those affirming books like King Khaled is Proud or, or like the empowerment, the virtual empowerment pack that you created.
Y'all really do need to get this empowerment pack. That empowerment pack workbook, it is like, if I do say so myself, I'm just gonna go ahead and brush my shoulder off right quick.
Right, you should. It was great. I was the first one to sign up to get it, so it was great.
They need to get that, because girl, we got these babies, and I just feel like because they're on like TikTok, they're on everything, they're seeing so much more. And because, like you're saying, the media doesn't respect Black lives, they could be going about their business, eating their fruit snacks, and the next thing you know, they're seeing someone be murdered on their TV because they don't mind showing us being executed on the street or whatever. And our kids are seeing that. So, okay.
Over and it's like, it's nonstop, right? Because they'll do it over and over and over again, as if this is someone's child or son, or just it's a human being who has value. Right. But clearly, it's not the same for everybody. But yeah.
Oh man, I don't know, girl. I know we can do it. I'm confident that we can do this. I saw somebody in the comments said that there needs to be like Black schools or online. I think, frankly, with people getting so used now to being educated virtually, or just the idea of it, because we've been having to do that, there are opportunities out there for, like, even if it's like a Saturday program that's virtual for Black kids. I would help somebody start it. I don't know if I'm the person to start it, but I could definitely help some people do that. Because, I feel like a lot of other cultures who are in the United States, they have school outside of school, right? So we have, like where I am, there's an Armenian community, there's an Armenian school, there's a Chinese school. And so we definitely need some additional resources.
And, it's, so when we think about trauma, not even, just racism, one of the biggest changes and the most positive impact that can happen for a child that's experienced trauma is having that one adult who unconditionally loves them, supports them, and believes in them. And so I know, many of us can think about, like, we had that teacher that just rode for us and was so incredibly supportive, and that teacher helped us get through, like, you can even, I'm sure that there are teachers that when you stop being in their class, you would still go to them for support. And so, when our children are in environments or schools where there is no adult that really loves them and supports them, that's detrimental. But if we're able to create communities where we have individuals who will say, like, I am making it my job to support this child, or to support these children, and to love them and support them, because we don't believe when our mother tells us how beautiful we are. It's like, okay, you're supposed to say that. But when we have adults outside of our immediate family who can, without question, say you are exceptional, that just having that one supportive adult, that one supportive relationship can be enough resilience in a child where they can overcome. And so you're absolutely right. We have to have those communities, those individuals who are willing to feed into our children's spirit and to their souls to continue to uplift them.
Yeah, I'm excited. Tomorrow we're interviewing 4 Black children who have these platforms. It's gonna be fun. This Wi-Fi better not give out on us. Like, it's doing pretty well right now. But and I think just at this time now, I just want to be able to also on this platform highlight the joy, the Black boy joy, the Black girl magic. And these four children, they really love reading, and they have platforms where they read books and they review them, and they try to get other kids interested in reading. And one of them has a business that he says he's saving for college, you know. So
that's right.
Yeah, that interview is tomorrow. Where I'm interviewing four children between 2 and 3 tomorrow, 15 minutes a piece. And it'd be great to hear from them because, you know, we have to also know that our ancestors were able, you know, we're still here, you know, we can survive. We have to survive. Yeah. Frankly, this country wouldn't be anything without us. Or any part of the Americas wouldn't be anything without Black people. So it's like, people hate what they need. Like, you know, like, you know, it's ridiculous. But I think it's also one thing that's important for Black children, and I try to be cognizant of. I don't want to, like, framing is really important, right? So I hate the idea that you say, okay, you can't do this because white people will think, or because the dominant culture would think. And I think a lot of times people say, you know, out of fear, maybe parents might be like, don't wear that hoodie because then white people think you're violent. And it's so sad. Again, there's so many limits on our bodies and our souls. And it's like, how do we make sure our children can be free to love, free to play, free to be themselves without always having to kind of like rein them in, either if it's like having to do with like the white gaze or just the white perceptions of Black bodies. Like how do we maneuver that?
And that, I mean, that's so challenging. Like, that's so challenging because it goes with the like respectability politics where, you know, if you wear a suit and if you know, dress like this, or if you do that, then maybe you won't die, or maybe the police won't target you, or maybe you won't be bird watching and a woman call the police on you, you know, because you're intimidating to them. And so like, there's very, you know, it's in some situations, there's very little that we can do to deal with other people's hatred. And so, you know, as adults and as a movement, I'm hoping that, you know, I think everyone's hoping that this time is different, because it seems like suddenly America has woken up. And so as much as possible, we have to push on the institutions where we live and where we work. So parents, now is the time to talk to you. And now is the time to ensure that your schools are acknowledging that Black Lives Matter, that your schools are acknowledging that disparities exist and that racism exists, and that they are going to do something about it. Because 6 months ago, that pressure wasn't there, but now the pressure is there. So we need to maximize this time in hopes that we can decrease the risk that our kids will have to deal with the fact that there's very little that they can do because some people are just that hateful. And so hopefully, you know, changing systems, because, you know, again, this is a systemic societal problem, but can make changes in our small little part of the world. And again, it also empowers our children. So oftentimes, you know, kids, if we can even engage our kids in our, you know, being proactive with school. So if you want your schools to add Black history or to integrate more environmental changes that reflect the kids, have your child be a part of it. Right. Have your child go into the meeting with you, because feeling like you can make a change gives you that strength and allows you to feel more empowered. So again, when it does happen, because we can't change everybody, but when it does happen, you can say, you know what, that's okay because I have been able to change this. Or I, you know, again, I love myself. I can handle stress, but I'm also impacting the world. You know, my mother was an activist, and I grew up watching her protest, and I went to the protests with her, and I watched her be arrested. But I also knew that she was changing things. And when she was like writing grants to get money, she really fought against homelessness, and particularly homelessness that was impacting Black people. And we were homeless when I was young, but she was very clear, like, we won't stay this way. And when we get out of homelessness, it won't just be us, it's going to be other people that come with us. Your mom, and so awesome. She really, like,
I love your mama, so my girl.
She gave me this sense of strength that like I can make a difference in the world. I will make a difference in the world. And even though there are going to be many mountains put in front of me, that won't stop me. And you know, so in terms of like what, you know, a less long-winded way of answering your question, but in terms of what we can do is just, you know, maximize this moment and go into, if your job hasn't sent out an email about racism, you need to email HR and you need to say, like, you need to address this, and it can't just be lip service, you need to do something. Because again, people are finally, for whatever reason, people are recognizing racism exists. We've been here for 400 years, so we get it,
right?
But they're just realizing it. And so this is going to burn out. Like, racism won't continue to be an issue come August. I mean, realistically, something else is going to happen and the media will shift its attention. So while we have people's attention, we need to try to make like real change.
Mm-hmm. It's so important. And I think, you know, and it sounds like what you're saying is how to retain hope. You know, I'm a Libra.
Right.
I'm a Libra, you know, we try to keep it balanced. You know, and you're right. I mean, for me, you do want to be less reactive, more proactive, right? So not that you're not affected by what's happening, it could knock you off your feet because it's that devastating. But if you're actively trying to do something to address whatever matter, you know, whatever injustices that you are called to address, it doesn't feel as heavy. It's like, it's still a terrible feeling to witness these things, and these are realities, right? But if you're always being proactive in addressing it, if you're always being proactive, for me, you know, they always say, like, what people do you want to serve? I serve black children, right? So those black children are my people. And so I, if I'm not leading it, say there are other issues I care about, then I donate or I do other things to assist. But if I'm leading it, it's for black children. So for me, it's like, I see what's happening in the world. I see the society they're living in. And again, like you're saying, I'm more focused on the armor you mentioned. Like, black children need this armor to be able to cope, thrive, and what do we say, cope, resist, and thrive, right? So they need this armor of, I'm awesome, I'm great, I could do awesome things, black is beautiful, you can't tell me, like, my curls are popping, like, you know, like all of that. That's what I'm here for. I'm signed up for that all day. So like, but, you know, so I think it's important for everyone who's on the chat, everyone in general, to know, like, a lot of you all are authors, a lot of you all are writing books for black kids to address these issues. And so that is part of the movement too. And so, yeah, we have to shift and change and do things, you know, when things come up, there are things that need to be done right away, but it's really good to be proactive is what you're saying. And that helps you retain the hope in this kind of setup.
And tell our children, like, you are powerful. You are powerful. Like, our children can walk into school, whatever school is going to look like this year, and they can teach a course. We can demand that schools give our children the floor to teach. We can demand that children, you know, that the school give our children the floor to make change. Our children are so powerful. Yep. Like, you know, they're 6 and 7-year-olds can make change, can influence things. And so showing our children now that you are powerful. You know, there's this image of this young black woman that I'm sure we've all seen. And she's very, you know, this slight young black woman standing in front of all these police in full armor. And she's standing so silently, and her dress is just blowing in the wind. And these police are almost like being knocked off of their tails because of just her presence. And so reminding our children that you're strong and you can make a difference, and showing them ways that they can make change even within their classroom. So, you know, when school starts and kids walk in and they don't see any black faces, you can walk to the teacher and say, there's no representation here. That's racist. And, you know, just name it. My child is going to tell you who some of their heroes are, and you're going to put those people on the wall. Right. And that alone is empowering. And, you know, because, you know, sometimes like this is what racism does, right? It makes us feel weak, and it makes us feel that we can't function, because when you're so focused on surviving, you can't think. So it's literally impossible to be in survival mode and use critical thinking skills. You can't. Our bodies aren't meant to do both, because if you're trying to run for your life, you don't want to use that part of your brain that's trying to solve a math problem or problem solve something complex. You're just trying to deal with what you need to do to get through the moment. And so when our children are in crisis, they can't critically think. So now is time to help them critically think and learn how to manage stress, and then walk into school and make those changes, and walk into their, churches and after school programs and establish their greatness.
So what I'm hearing is we need a training for these kids on how to advocate for those. I mean, I'm all about the action steps. Like what the actions that need to happen. We need to be teaching our kids to advocate in the ways that they can in their age range, like whatever is appropriate for their age range or whatever, because kids are so brilliant. They're coming out like geniuses every day now, right? So they're definitely built for the new world. So that's what it sounds like. Okay. Well, we're almost at the hour, like a minute away. Are there any last words you want to share with us?
I mean, I feel like that went by fast. I think one thing that's important for us to understand is like trying to avoid this conversation isn't helping our kids. And I know, we try to protect our kids, but the fact is that the world that even our children are living in is different than the generation that we just didn't have 24-hour social media access. We didn't they're 8 who have access to the phone, and their parents may or may not know what they're looking at. So not talking about it is not helpful. In the same way that, parents assume if I don't talk about sex, they won't do it.
Right.
No, that's not right. They'll just do it. Right. They'll just do it, and they won't know what they're doing, and they won't be protected. Right. So in the same way that, sex education is important, we have to educate our kids about who they are, why they're exceptional, what the world is about, and how they can stand up for themselves and fight this world, fight the negativity in this world, and come out great on the other side. And so just encouraging parents, like, don't be afraid to have this conversation. And again, 3-year-olds are being disproportionately expelled because they're Black. So waiting until they're 13 is already too late. We have to start this conversation earlier.
That's real. That's real. And thank you so much. Oh my goodness. I'm calling you Nicole, Dr. Christian-Brathwaite. Thank you so much for this, because I know all of people want to save this and they want to watch this because we want to make sure our kids are protected. We want to make sure our kids can thrive because they are born to do great things. And we have to tell them, you are born to do great things. Don't worry about what they're talking about. Focus on yourself. Look at yourself and be like, I'm great. I'm Black. Right. I'm proud. So yes, I'm so happy you could join us. I am going to do a shameless plug and tell you that Empower Pack is all about empowering Black kids. It's amazing. It came out last night. You better get it. It's on the website. The link is in our bio. I'm really excited. I've already got some feedback, and they're like, oh my goodness. And somebody told me they're already waiting for volume 2. I was like, if you knew what it took me to do volume 1. But anyway, thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you for being you. You are just amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you, Nicole. You too, man. I'm always bragging about you. I'm always like, my friend, she's so smart and she's so kind and considerate, and she runs to save the day. Like when that lady fell and you ran like Jackie joined our seat and to make sure she was okay. I will never forget that. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great, and thanks, Philly, for coming out and representing. Have a great night, everybody.
Yeah. Everyone who was here, thank you for being part of this live, and thank you very much, Trinity Scribes. Trinity Scribes been putting I heard y'all talk about me calling me Teddy Riley, but I hope I did that. I hope I did that. Thank you, Denita.
We got it right.
We got it right.
So it doesn't matter.
That wasn't my fault. I don't know what that was. Anyway. Thank you, Denita from Trinity Scribe. She's been taking notes. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to make sure I save this so that people aren't upset with me afterwards. All right. Thank you. Love you, girl.
Everybody.
Have a good
Love you.
day.
Bye.
Bye.